Okay, welcome back to our lecture on Chapter 8, The Media for Political Science, American National Government. I am Dr. Jonathan Keesley, your professor. This chapter is broken down into four parts. The first part is what is the media? Let's jump right in. First, a quote from Thomas Jefferson. No government ought to be without censors, and where the press is free, no one ever will. So the media can be a great check on corruption, be it in the private sector or the public sector. The media traditionally is a good safeguard against that, because if you are corrupt, you certainly don't want that information getting out, and the media is the way of getting information out in many ways. So what is public relations? Well, it's a biased communication intended to improve the image of people, companies, or organizations. So when you hear, hey, public relations for this celebrity, or public relations for this organization, or public relations for this company, yeah, they're going to portray that person, organization, or company in a positive light as possible. That's public relations. That's not exactly media or scrutiny. Mass media is the collection of all media forms that communicate information to the general public. Think TV, print, like magazines or newspaper, that type of thing. Radio and the internet. There's so many things available digital now. Taking a look at the book, and this was up through like 2019, the leading sources. Where do you get your news? And so if you survey enough people, we have found that, of course, fair and balanced, or no bias whatsoever, never any fake news. The number one source is Facebook. I'm putting my head in my hands right now and doing a complete face palm. Yikes. So hopefully it's links to credible things which are a little bit more below. Facebook's number one, CNN/Fox News, depending on whether you lean left or right. Seems to be a pretty dead heat for second. Major news network, CBS. Then NPR, which is National Public Radio. So in terms of a radio entrant, NPR is where it's at. And then the British Broadcasting Company, BBC. Followed by YouTube. There's a lot of different reputable things on YouTube. There's also plenty of not so reputable news sources on YouTube. The Wall Street Journal, radio personality, conservative talk host, Rush Limbaugh, and then Twitter. I thought Twitter would actually be a little bit higher. I actually use Twitter a lot. I do not accept follows. I do not follow anyone individually, but I do follow some news sources, and Twitter is pretty good for late breaking news. So in 1983, 90% of the media was comprised of 50 companies. By 2019, 90% of the media was comprised of 6 conglomerates. Notice I didn't say companies. I said they are companies, but they are conglomerates. They are a pile of different things in one place. This raises concerns about monopoly control over information and an increasing the controllability of agenda bias and that type of thing. So you got to keep an eye on that. Agenda setting is the media's ability to choose which issues or topics get attention. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the latter part of this lecture. So let's look at the evolution of media over time. Started out with print media in 1704. And is still going today. In fact, I actually still take the local paper because I find it's one of the better ways to get your, local news. National news is a little bit biased, but, they rely on other outlets for that. But I still like print media, especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur. The local newspaper can identify all the problems going on in your local community, and then you can create a company to solve those problems. So since 1704, before this country was its own country, there was a printing press. So the party press era, a period during the 1780s in which newspaper content was biased by political partnerships. Basically, the parties each had their own paper, or they had influence over papers. Still kind of happens today a little bit. Yellow journalism is a sensationalized coverage of scandals and human interest stories. Notice this is starting in the 1700s. Yellow journalism still happens today. Much of our coverage is sensationalized and focused on people and scandals and not necessarily facts. Muckracking is news coverage focused on exposing corrupt businesses and government practices. But you never knew what that was called. It's called muckracking if you're trying to find corruption. Digital paywalls is kind of, as the internet has emerged, a lot of print media have had to been forced to go digital. That's the need to pay for a subscription to access published online materials. So for myself, I'm a subscriber to The Economist. It's a magazine, kind of an economic slant, but it's a lot of news. Originally a British publication, still really is, but they have great coverage of the news here. I find NPR helpful. I find BBC helpful, and then I squint a little bit and look at Fox News and CNN every now and then. But the whole point is, don't get your media from one place. Newspapers have been forced online. However, things like The Economist, which is a printed magazine, news magazine, they also have online content which it can supplement. So, for example, if I'm waiting on takeout at a restaurant and I have a copy of The Economist at home, I can actually pull up the app on my phone and start reading it right there, which is pretty cool. Radio, 1920s to current. Local, kind of started out local AM, FM. Then we moved to digital radio with more reach. It used to be you kind of drive anywhere and you'd get out of range for a local AM or FM station. Digital gave you a little more reach, a little more high quality sound. And then, of course, now we've moved to satellite radio where you can keep the same station no matter where you're driving, as long as it's not like under a bridge or something. Television, 1939 to current. Roosevelt had one of the statements in 1939. It was one of the first televised statements by a president to current. It really was a game changer. Best illustrated in 1960 with the debate between Richard Nixon and Kennedy, the presidential debate. Radio listeners thought the debate was a draw and perhaps leaned a little bit Nixon. However, TV viewers obviously could see the two candidates, and they thought JFK ran away with it. It was so funny because it was just like, hey, if you just heard them, you thought, they're pretty even. But if you saw them, Nixon, who had been ill, appeared pale. He didn't wear any makeup. He was unshaven. He just looked rough. All right, so you added the visual appearance of his answers, visual appearance to his answers. JFK, conversely, was all dressed to the nines, wore makeup, carried himself confident, had good body language, that type of thing. And everybody that saw it thought JFK won. Everyone that heard it thought they at worst had a draw. Maybe Nixon had a slight lead. Newer media trends. Cable news outlets, left and right slanted. Online news outlets, left and right slanted. There's obviously some credibility issues. There are so many people trying to act like they're actual real news now. And boy, I just don't know what it is online anymore. Social media, you can see above, it can be left and right slanted. It can have credibility issues. You can have, quote unquote, fake news. All right, bigly. All right, so fake news issues. You guys have all seen that in your life. It's been everywhere. Citizen journalism, the rise of social media and the internet has led to citizen journalism, video and print news posted to the internet or social media by citizens rather than news media. Twitter, you usually find out things on Twitter faster than anyone can report it. Snapchat, same thing. Instagram, I've seen a lot of news come across that way. Facebook, come very, very quickly through citizen journalism. Soft news presented as in an entertaining style. That's not news. It's hey, this celebrity is dating this celebrity, and that's soft news, man. That's just for entertaining. That's not hardcore news. So, with all this going on, how do we regulate them in the media? Well, the media and the First Amendment. Let's repeat the First Amendment here. Congress shall make no laws respecting the establishment of a religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press. There you go. Back to Thomas Jefferson's quote. Or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, or the petition of the government for redress of grievances. If you recall, being silenced was one of the things that the founding fathers were not cool with. All right. And as you can see here with Thomas Jefferson, huge, big, all right, with that quote. Okay. You want to be able to get your grievances out there. You want there to be some sunshine shining on some dark places that people might be hiding something, some corruption. However, you have to be careful to make claims. If you have spoken information about a person or organization that is not true and harms the reputation of that person or organization, you are guilty of slander. So slander is spoken information that is not accurate. Whereas liable, it's hard to say, is printed information about a person or organization that is not true and harms the reputation of the person or organization. So, slander is spoken, libel is written, it's printed. Okay, so if you went on to Fox News and slandered someone, that would be slander. Or if you went on to foxnews.com and wrote an article that slandered someone, it is printed, it's libel. Okay, keep that in mind. Slander versus libel. Libel is printed, slander is spoken. Slander starts with an S, so does spoken. Libel, I don't know, it's printed. LP, okay? Libel's printed. Now, There are issues of classified material. Sometimes when you're reporting on the government, obviously there's some things that have to be restricted. Like, for example, if you got wind, and you could write an article that you got wind that the Navy SEALs knew where Osama bin Laden was hiding, and you could report that. You don't want to do that because Osama bin Laden can find out that we know where he is before we can go kill or capture him. So there's something called prior restraint. It's a government action that stops someone from doing something before they're able to do it. So forbidding someone to publish a book he or she plans to release. Say someone plans to publish a book about every secret agent in the CIA. Yeah, we wouldn't want that information getting out. That's classified. You cannot publish that. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, they have some regulations. A few of the more notable ones, 3 of them here. Equal time rule, an FCC policy that all candidates running for office must be given the same radio or television opportunities. Notice I didn't say they get the same time. You have to buy those. But if you sell, let's say, Joe Biden time on CBS's evening news for an ad, you cannot deny, say, Donald Trump the same opportunity to buy the same ad space. So keep that in mind. It's not saying Biden still has to pay for it, Trump still has to pay for it, etc., etc. Fairness doctrine is now defunct, meaning this is no longer applicable. And a 1949 FCC policy that required if I could speak, that required holders of broadcast licenses, so the people who could have a company to broadcast, to cover controversial issues in a balanced manner. So you basically could just be just like completely slanted, like just like in the bag for one party versus another. I kind of wish this would make a comeback. It seems like we're kind of headed towards this this precipice, this cliff where news are just going to be unrecoverable. But fairness doctrine initially was in place, but it's not really a thing anymore. Indecency regulations, laws that limit indecent or obscene material on public airways. This comes into effect if you're on live television or live radio and you say an expletive. And they don't catch it and they don't bleep it out, that station's going to get fined by the FCC under indecency regulations. Transparency, sunshine laws require government documents and proceedings to be made public. So that's again trying to uncover corruption. You can't just hide things, even though it happens anyway. But sunshine laws are an attempt to have more transparency, and media uses it a lot of times. Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, a federal statute that requires public agencies to provide certain types of information requested by citizens. Guess what? A reporter is a citizen, so they can make a Freedom of Information Act request and get some information about, say, your financials, if you're the highway department, or your how you paid out winners in your employees if you're the lottery system. So keep in mind that Freedom of Information, FOIA Act, is very, very important. Reporter's privilege is the right of a journalist to keep a source confidential. Now, there are some stipulations there where you're required to reveal your source. However, reporters kind of have a code. They won't do it. They'll go to prison before they do it. But for the most part, reporters are given a privilege that they don't have to, like if you found out, say, a congressman was embezzling money from China, that reporter doesn't have to report how he found that out, how he or she found that out. But the congressman may have to answer about that money. So it's good to have transparency. The impact of the media effects and bias, it's out there, man. Hypodermic theory, there's several theories here. There's actually 3 that kind of say, hey, the media can, the media can't. But the hypodermic theory is the idea that information is placed in a citizen's brain and accepted. It's just put there and you just process it and you move on. I think that's mostly not so true, but also somewhat true, because if you hear something over and over and over, it becomes a truth in your head. Minimal effect theory, the idea that the media has little effect on citizens, I think that's mostly untrue, maybe a little bit true. If you don't really watch the news a lot, it will have a minimal effect, okay? If you don't read the news a lot, if you don't listen to the news a lot, it will have a minimum effect. However, as you have more exposure to that information does become kind of placed in your brain and accepted. So it just kind of depends. Cultivation theory, the idea that the media's affect a citizen's worldview through information presented. I think that's the most spot on. Yeah, sure. How things are framed, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, really affect how you see the world. So framing is the process of giving a news story a specific context or background. So how you frame it matters. You have episodic framing, framing. When a story focuses on isolated details or specifics rather than looking at the whole picture or broadly at the whole issue. If you just focus on one thing, one decision, it kind of loses. You kind of look at one tree in a forest and you lose the perspective of the entire forest. It can be good because you can come down and get some information on like some very specific levels, but at the same time, if you lose that broad perspective, it loses some context as well. So there can be some bias and some effects there. Thematic framing takes a broad look at an issue and it really just skips the numbers or details how the issue's changed over time. So basically, it's looking like long run how things have changed. This can be problematic too because you can thematically frame things so that they look one way versus another just because you're trying to sell a long run message. And, we never have media do that. Wink, wink. You can't really see me winking on this thing, but I'm winking. Priming, the process of predisposing readers or viewers or listeners, you could say, to think a particular way. Lots of this. CNN, Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, all these NPR, they have like these prompts almost that just make you respond. They prime you for, hey, this is going to be fair and balanced, or hey, this is going to be critical. Hey, this is very urgent. It's really usually not that urgent. It's usually very not fair or balanced or, all that important even really. So they prime you for that. And then lastly, the impact of media. A beat. It's the coverage area assigned to a journalist for news or stories. So basically, you can have someone on the White House beat, and all they do is cover the president. Or you can have someone on the college football beat, or the Clemson, South Carolina beat, or the local school district beat, or the mayor's office beat. So that's how journalism works there. Media, incredibly important getting information out. Incredibly important in terms of keeping things transparent, but at the same time, they have some issues in terms of bias and left or right leanings. So, hope you enjoyed this quick and dirty look at Chapter 8, the media for American national government. Thanks.